I've been teaching for 20 years at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and I also have a practice that I have been the sole practitioner for the last 10 years. I was at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill for a number of years as an associate partner working on huge projects, and now I work on one project a year and teach full-time with graduate students and advanced undergraduate students. I thought, when I was asked to do this, I was thinking, what is so interesting about the United States right now for me? And what I find really interesting is that we're technologically very savvy. We're doing more and more things by computer and all the other, the internet. And now we're saying, oh, wait a minute, isn't there more to life than sitting at one's desk and creating everything solely by yourself? So I think the way that I'd like to work these lectures is to talk about what the United States is doing to bring people back together and to have more social interaction so that they can start to bounce ideas off one another, that it's that human relationship that we're trying to get back to after using all the technologies and sitting at one's desk. Now let's find public space again, and I'll show you 3 examples right away that are really changing the fabric of the United States, changing the fabric of the cities that I'm showing you. The second group of lectures is going to be on the arts and the university, and how our universities are now saying, yes, we've got all this technological savvy, but really we want people to start thinking critically and seizing opportunities in a different way, to look at things differently. And they're starting to look back at the arts and say, let's look and study how the creative arts can be brought back into architecture and urban planning. That will entail the university arts, and then I will talk about innovation centers, which are proliferating in the United States, starting with universities and moving out into the major cities. My final presentation will be on the curriculum of my university, and that is the Illinois Institute of Technology, and how architects are taught to think critically, to seize the opportunities, and to use research to seize those opportunities. So I'll show you the examples and how we've changed from the 1950s, when Mies started the program, to perhaps 20 years ago. And as of last year, we have a new dean, Villaretz, who came from the Netherlands, and how he's imagined what the schools should be going forward. So with that in mind, let's start the first lecture, and I will get over to this side. I call it unvolumetric architecture, and I will explain what that means. It's with New York City, Seattle, and Chicago as test cases. These are my definitions. Constructing space without constructing buildings. So it's the space in between. When we're talking about urbanism, this is just as important for us now that we have all these huge buildings everywhere. Now, how about the space in between? How do we bring people back into the city? And I think that's very important, at least in the United States. We're a car culture. We're not used to walking around that much, especially, for instance, in Chicago, that is a pedestrian city, but when it gets really cold, that's a little hard to do. So I think most cities now are looking at spaces that they can construct that the public is invited in. Now, financing is a different story. It's not all publicly financed, and I'll get to that as well. But I think, in general, that this is a need that we're seeing. How do you glue these spaces together? And this is the glue. Again, the void weaves relationships between the solids, allowing for temporal variation. So how does it change in the morning, nighttime, spring, summer, fall, winter? Those are very important. I think the key issues, you have to collaborate with many disciplines. It's no longer the heroic architect. He has to, or he or she has to work with landscape architects, I think urban planners, civil engineers, structural engineers. What is good design? That's a very subjective thing, but I'm going to try to show you examples here that I believe are very successful and good design, and how they work and function. And then I'll be talking about, in the United States, we have been very successful working publicly and privately for these projects. So I'm going to focus on New York, Chicago, and Seattle. Very different climates, two different coasts, one right in the middle. And obviously, I'll talk a lot about Chicago because I've been there a long time. So we're going to start in New York City. And in New York City, there are three that I'd like to talk about. The High Line, that's the elevated train tracks. Ground Zero, where 9/11 occurred. And Lincoln Center, which is on the Upper West Side. You can see the north is Lincoln Center. Ground Zero is the south side of Manhattan. High Line in between. So, with New York City, this was a dream 10 years ago, this High Line. It was a small organization. It said, what if we have this abandoned rail line, elevated, what if we made that a public park? And it's elevated on the second level, and it's on the west side of the city, and it was envisioned to stitch that whole part of that city together. This is just an aerial view of I think, the first and second, and we're already on the third iteration. So this is the history of the site. This is what it was. So abandoned rail tracks. We have these everywhere in the United States. And New York, obviously, is the most populated city in the United States. So they said, well, we don't have enough green space in this area of New York. So again, fauna and flora but it was a viable train commuting area at one point. Abandoned, you can see on this upper, that it just stopped. Nothing happened, and it's just been sitting dormant for years, I think 70 years. Now, what was built? So they started to talk about, okay, what if we start at 9th Street and we work our way up from the south all the way up to 30th? So with that in mind, I will try to show that with a pointer. This is the beginning, Gansevoort Plaza, and that's just a viewing platform. Then you have stairs that there are certain ways of getting up along this. There's another entrance at this point, 14th. So they started to figure out how people would get over into this area without, having any problem with the subways. So they situated it. This is a major subway line, and the 9th is just the beginning, and that was somewhat problematic because this was the meat packing area at that point. Then we move along, and we have the 10th Avenue Square. So there were certain places to walk and certain places to pause in this. Oh. So you can see now, this is the beginning, the first phase of the project. This was when it was first opened. Then this was a viewing platform right here, set right in the middle of the street so that you could view the traffic going back and forth. And this is the window that you view onto. The cross-section, why I like to show this is it was very simply done. That they used the railroad ties, they brought in wood, again, just to add to the walkways. It's a very simple palette of materials, and then brought in grasses, prairie grasses. So again, the maintenance would be less. Now, I'm not going to say the maintenance is by any means economical, but so many people use this now. I've been told annually it's $200 million a year to maintain, but it's still a beautiful piece. There are places for the handicapped to come up, so it was completely handicap accessible, and that's through elevators. The planting was done, again, very specifically with the walkways in mind, so there are different episodes. It's like a novel that you walk through, and you have very different feels throughout it. Again, this is the typical garden, and there's a path usually, and then the natural grasses. And again, this looks like it doesn't need to be very maintained, but with so many people in New York and using it, I think that it's constant maintenance. These are the various plantings throughout. Now, this is spurring huge developments along this. I think that they foresaw a certain amount of residential and commercial development, but it's been an amazing success. In this picture, as you can see, the High Line is moving along just this sliver. And this is where it stopped at that time. But as you can see along the river, you have a Frank Gehry office building. This is a Jean Nouvel apartment building. And again, the rents are skyrocketing all along this way. So these types of buildings are now being demolished, and you see all the parking lots. These are now being slated for new buildings up north and south of this. It's become the very trendy area of New York. And you can see again up, this is just first and second phase. So it's a really interesting space within, you have Central Park and then you have the High Line. And just those two differences, for me, it's great to compare and contrast. Again, many residential areas, but they're really on display. This becomes, you're part of a movie. People are walking by your apartment all the time, looking in, you're looking out. So I think you have to be a certain type of person to want to live here. I don't think I'd want to be there. This is the Standard Hotel. This was one of the first anchors. This was designed by Polshek Architects. And it's a very popular hotel. And again, at night, you get to see, this is a film in and of itself. But this is right at the beginning, or the south side of the High Line. This is the Frank Gehry office tower. Again, just a very interesting building that sprouted up along that, and then juxtapose that with the Jean Nouvel to the north, which is all apartments. It still maintains the grittiness of that part of the city, but I think it's going to be replaced certainly over time. And now this is the end of the phase 2. And we're now getting into more interesting apartment buildings that are being built. This is Neil Denari, who just completed this one. And you can see, again, it's like Rear Window. You just can see everything, but it's the front window. This warehouse now has been converted into a private school. And it's ingeniously put into, they've got the whole program in, and then they use the back of it for a cafeteria, and it opens out onto the High Line. So there is some privacy with this. And then this is Chelsea Market, and again, a thriving market in New York. This is phase 3, and this is being built now. So it's, at this point, it stopped here, and now that little loop, and I believe that's the end of it. Final phase. And they're going to just have a terminus where you can sit and enjoy a mini garden up in the air. What's also nice about this whole piece of urban infrastructure is that you really see the city in a very different way. You're elevated, you're looking down on the street, you're looking out at the water, which you've never, up to this point, there are very few places that you can take that glimpse. And this, everyone is here. There are so many people who walk summer, spring, fall, winter. I was there in January and I walked, and it was not as packed as summer. They weren't sitting out and sunning themselves, but it really has become an attractor. This is the third phase that they're going to turn into a little playground for children as well. And then in the future, this is how many buildings are just slated right now. Apartment, commercial. I'm sure Jeannie will be talking about, she has one of the buildings on the High Line. Yeah. It's not shown here. It's not shown here. No, it's further. I think that they don't have all the ones that are ready for. Zaha Hadid. This is the one, Studio Gang. And this is Jeannie's building. I think it's going to go ahead. And Renzo Piano, he's doing the new museum down, the Whitney Museum. And these are just photos of what it's going to look like. Stern. Okay, the next one, Ground Zero. This is on the southernmost tip. This is where the Twin Towers by Isozaki. And you can see this was a competition right after 9/11 occurred. And these are the 2 points in which the World Trade Center was lost. What to occupy? At this point, you know, this was a very controversial competition. There were over 5,000 entries. It was very emotional. And the winning one was to commemorate the people who died by voids. And these are, right here, these are large fountains that have waterfalls cascading down into the depths, the base of World Trade Center. The museum, you can barely see on this, but it's right there. The museum will go all the way down so that you can view at the base of those waterfalls. Very dramatic, very powerful. This was when it was first opened. You had to go through security to get in. You had to have a ticket. They were very nervous about this in the beginning. Now it's easier to get in, but this was right at the beginning. But these are the 50-foot, what is that, 15 meter, about 15 meters deep. And then it drops again into another pool, and that will be at the base of the museum. But surrounding these fountains, these have all the names of all the people who were perished at that point. So it's a very contemplative park, very different from the High Line. You come here, you can sit, and you really are alone at certain points. So again, it's not very far away from the High Line, and yet very different in feel. You can see the surrounding, it's all high-rise around it. And you can see this is the Freedom Tower that was going up at the time. And that was designed by SOM, and it's topped off at this point. And that's what it will look like. But the garden was designed by Peter Walker, and he worked with the architect who designed the space, and they won the competition. And I think that you can't tell the difference between architecture or the landscape architect. It's so seamless in the way that they design this. Very successful and very powerful. The last one in New York City I want to talk about is Lincoln Center, and that's up on the Upper West Side, as I said. And this is an area that Diller and Scofidio, the contemporary architects, have come in and have just added one piece of landscape that's changed the whole complexion of that site. So here's the complex. It's a huge project with many different auditoriums, and this is what was there. So you can see there are 3 auditoriums. This one, that one, this one, and then there's a school. And across the street is part of the school, the Juilliard School of Music. These were the men who designed it. And here is the rational plan that was, you have the Juilliard School, Philharmonic Hall here, the theater, opera, and another theater. So what to do with this? It's very austere, it's very elegant, but it's usually dead. Not much was happening. People would go to the theater and then leave right after that. So this is the intervention that Diller and Scofidio looked at right there. How to make that a more animated space. So you see the plan from before and what's happened afterward, just by adding some green. It's very little intervention, by the way. And yet, lifting up the green to expose an eating area. And then this is a lawn that people sit on, and that they actually have a place to view the beautiful fountain as well. So it's a very minimal intervention, and yet very powerful. And you can see the section below the fountain. And then they added this portico that brought you in. And added some art in the stairs. But there you have it. Okay, now we're going to the West Coast. This is Seattle, Washington, Olympic Sculpture Park. It is a very interesting site, and we'll get to it. This is what is there now, but okay, so the issues here were, this was the water edge that nobody could get to because there are trains, there's a highway, and then there's a huge hill. This is about, I want to say 2 stories high from this point to this point. So how do you bring this whole area together? And this is the downtown's not too far away, but this was an underutilized area just because of all the things that cut through it. What was built? Weiss and Manfredi are the architects, and they do both landscape as well as architecture. They teach at the University of Pennsylvania. So what they did is they came in and started to take, I think I have their partie here. So they took a folded piece of paper, ripped it, and twisted it. So they could reach down to the water and then navigate through ramps and stairs all the way up to the top. And now you can see some of those issues right here. We've got the stair leading up to the topmost part. And then the joggers are down closer to the water. And there's one museum up on top, and it is a piece of architecture, but it's very minimal in comparison to the rest of the site. So they've restored the shoreline and put in an aquatic habitat, again, sustainable. Then they've gone to the rail line is number 2 right here. So they've covered over that, and you can navigate through that. Here's the highway. And so you can move from the water easily up to the pavilion and garage. Steep in certain places, but it's doable. So nothing's been disrupted. They've just covered over it. And again, it has made a huge difference for this part of Seattle. And you see behind, those are all new buildings, all new residential, looking out to the water. So again, it's a claimed part of the city that for a long time was derelict. Okay, now we're at Chicago. This is called Grant Park, and it's found at the auditorium, or at the aquarium on the south. It is, these are city blocks right here. One city block, 8 of these equals a mile. So it is an enormous park right in downtown Chicago. This is the major downtown area. The Art Institute is right here. And these are playing fields that have, and this one is an amphitheater. And then this is the big fountain, the Buckingham Fountain. To the north is going to be the site that you're working on for your presentation with Jeannie. The water's here, the marina is here, so in the summer it's filled with sailboats. So it's the front door of Chicago. So I'm going to talk about the history of the site very briefly. But this is what's there now. So this was the front door of Chicago. And as you can see, this was in the 1890s. And the boats, it was every which way, and it was laid out on a grid, of course, but it went right into Lake Michigan. Then, again, because, oh, I did this wrong. This is Michigan Avenue, the wall of Michigan Avenue, Lake Michigan, so we're looking north to south. And it was just one big, really cesspool more than anything else. And garbage was there. You can see it in 1908. Lots of rail lines because Chicago was this was the hub of all rail lines. 1909, the Burnham Plan. 1930, so some of the Burnham Plan was fulfilled, this part, but this still remained just a huge pit because, again, these were commuter trains, and this is the wall of Michigan Avenue. So this was, again, I can't believe that it's been like that. Up until 1986, it was like that. 1998, they asked Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill to do an urban plan of this area because, again, this was just rail lines and now parking. And just to the south is Soldier Field. Again, a beautiful skyline, but the site was just a scar at that point. So this is what was once there, and you can see the site. These were two. This was an ice skating rink and some tennis courts. Lakeshore Drive. Again, the Hancock. And I think Kevin talked about Lake Point Tower to you as well. So here we have the site, and you can see it's our only topography. Chicago is flat, very flat. But this is 3 stories down. So let's say it's 60, maybe 20 meters down. And there's service lines, there are railways, parking lots. So you can see as it was growing how it's changed. So this is Buckingham Fountain. In the background, you see the Sears Tower that was designed in the 70s by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. This is what a festival, I think this might have been Lollapalooza here, which I've seen, you have that too. So this is what happens with Grant Park. Again, the site, parking lots. This was the 1998 plan, Beaux-Arts plan by Skidmore. Once this was unveiled, the public said, no, we don't want this. The city officials started to get nervous about it. And that's when private monies came in and said, no, we want to have something more than the old for the new millennium. So they hired Frank Gehry. And that's who started the project. And we're going to talk about that first. That's this area. And this is an open air amphitheater with numerous events along the way, but this is a typical summer day now. So the Gehry Music Shell is what we're going to discuss first. These were the models that Frank provided. The structure was done by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, Bill Baker's group. It's all titanium, his signature. But acoustically, it works quite well. And it closes up in the winter, but the shell itself stays exposed. It's free concerts all through the summer. And then people explore it all during the day. They have yoga, they have dance classes. It's widely used. This structure here is not only, this carries all the acoustical. So these are all the speakers, and it works quite well in that way. The Music and Dance Theater was built subsequently, and that was Tom Beebe who built that, and that's home for the Godfrey Ballet as well as Hubbard Street. Here's the section. Now you can see that the topography, this is ground here, and it goes deep into the earth, and it still doesn't touch the trains. Then there was an issue of how to get from the elevated area above, this is a major street, Columbus, and how to navigate between that down into this park. And Frank Gehry was commissioned to do this as well. This is handicap accessible, and he worked with Skidmore, Owings & Merrill on this. So these were the existing site conditions. Millennium Park, and then the plaza that they were trying to get to. So it was like a serpentine snake, but again, because it was using the handicap accessibility code to his advantage. This is one of the most successful pieces of, I think, public art, as well as a useful bridge in the city. So one side is concrete, the other side is steel. And you can see it as it snakes across Columbus. And these are just the structural drawings that, again, Skidmore developed that with Frank Gehry. Massive steel. And then the final piece in this area is the Lurie Garden, and that was another competition. So again, landscape architects were brought in. And this one was won by Catherine Gustafson, Gustus and Guthrie, and that's in Seattle. They're based in Seattle. She trained in Paris, and her winning design was a beautiful landscape garden that's really almost a secret garden to go in. It has water, and then these beautiful landscape areas. And then it leads right to, this takes you in, or you can go into the smaller gardens here, but this takes you right into the Art Institute, and this is the new addition designed by Renzo Piano. So again, it's continued to spur growth. The Art Institute, this is the original building. This was one addition, but then the architect started to work with the Lurie Garden as well as the Frank Gehry. And so they all started to work in tandem together to produce this giant piece. These were the renderings of Piano's flying carpet, as he called it, roof. And this is what it is today. Then the bean. And this is, again, another piece of artwork that brings so many people together. And this was Kapoor. He was commissioned to do that. You can start to see how it was erected. This is all stainless steel, ground. Each panel was ground. I think it took 18 months to grind it. But these are the crowds that come. And at first I thought, why would a bean be so successful? And yet they're reflections, and you can see the reflections. People look up, they see the city, they see themselves, and there are more photographs taken of people around the bean. So it really is actually it's quite a beautiful piece for that area. The Crown Fountain, again, another piece of artwork by John Plensa from Barcelona. And this was an interesting one architecturally as well. Crick and Sexton, another architectural firm in the city, worked with the artist to design this. These are water fountains, and yet there are LED screens that you could see the person's face. They photographed about 350 faces, just of any man, any woman from Chicago. And this goes constantly, 24 hours a day. They open their mouth and the water pours out. And in the winter, they've subdued the water, but in the spring, summer, fall, it's one of the most popular places for kids to go, especially. But you can see the section of this and how so these are glass blocks that combine electricity and water. Not a great combination, but there you have it. Very simple and yet very powerful. Now you see, there's no water, but still the faces. Again, these are private funds. That's why it's called the Pritzker Fountain, or each piece, or the Crown Fountain, the Pritzker Pavilion. These are prominent families in Chicago who are committed to being in the city and are committed to providing art and spaces for the public to enjoy. These are not private spaces. We call it the Millennium Park effect. First, I'm going to just show you the number of donors. So this is in addition to City Hall. So we have the base park improvements. I also put it in sort of, not so easy. I don't think that, I didn't do it, I didn't adjust it to today's numbers, but close enough, I think. The Gehry trellis and ribbons, so that was just the auditorium. The pedestrian bridge, that sinuous, you see how much it was back then in 2005. The Chase Promenade, and that was, again, I should have the picture, but we can go through that. But these are all the elements. The Wrigley Square peristyle, again, these are the Wrigley family, British Petroleum. The Lurie Garden, that's another donor. The sculpture, $26 million, and the rest of the components. Okay, so these were all privately funded. $220 million, or 376 reals, million. Then this is the city. So there's a garage underneath the entire Millennium Park. 3 levels of garage. City-owned. Then we have, that's the train, the Metro. So the train tracks are still going, they're still operational. The finishes and the landscape they paid for. The pavilion, they put in a piece of that. The design and management costs, and those are inclusive of the original design as well from SOM. The Exelon buildings, those are, we have a little rental, bike rental space. So 270 million. So you can see it really was a partnership here. So total, 850 million. So clearly, this didn't sit well with everyone when it was being built. To spend that much money when in Chicago we have dire needs for education, we need infrastructure. So this was the front door of Chicago, and Mayor Daley at the time said, we're going to do this. And Mayor Daley did what he wanted to, and he said, no, we're going to continue with this, even with the cost overruns. But you can see that the park started to prompt more and more business to come in. So the impact on the park, this was, so units completed just in the first 2 years, 4,000 units, just downtown, never had been done before. 10,000 more units, and again, you're going to be working on a project that's just north of here, and that spurred growth. This is a very desirable area to be in now, both for rental as well as owning your condominium. So 25 of those units, 2,500 of those 10,000 had to do with the park. $400 back then, it's gone way up since then. And this is also, you have to understand, 2008 was a very tough time in the United States. Everything came to a standstill at that point, economically. And it's still, at this point, it's still building upon the Millennium Park. So it's about 140 square meters, the unit size. So just for the residential development. Again, there was no residential development in that area. It was all office and retail. So there was no displacement in this area. So this one I thought was interesting. The buzz surrounding Millennium Park's opening is stoking sales at nearby condo projects with buyers standing in line for hours to put down deposits. As you can see, so estimated activity. Hotel revenue, again, many more hotels have been built in this area since this time. And I think we've got an 86% rate now of occupancy down there. Restaurant, as everybody must know by now, Chicago is known for its food. I think that's because our winters are so terrible, everyone eats. The retail. And taxes, our taxes, we certainly do have a higher tax in this area. So I'm sorry I didn't put that in reals. So total visitors, 30 million visitors. Now we've always had visitors come down to the Loop, but not as a destination point. They're coming for the museums. They're coming to look at the architecture, the architectural legacy downtown. But now we have a steady stream. And this is the view of looking at the Art Institute, which again is reaping the benefits as well. Now the future. This is the area that the park, the Millennium Park, is right now. So it's 24 acres. I don't know how many that is. There's the calculations there. And so this is where the Children's Museum was going to go. So here's all this development, and it's very successful. And up here, this is the residential area, and again, this is going to be your site up here with Jeannie. And this area, there were a few residential pieces before, and one was over here, this one, but very few. Well, this became so successful and so many people were coming, is that then they said, okay, let's have the Children's Museum. We'll put that, it was over on Navy Pier, which is up here. Well, as soon as they started to develop that, community got involved. And they said, not in our neighborhood, even though it was a children's museum. They didn't want anything more to be built in the park because this parkland was supposed to be always open to the public. So they didn't want any more museums. The Art Institute, which is located down here, is the only building that's in the park proper. And that was done at the turn of the century, the 20th century. And so now even this one, as much as it was really fit into the landscape, it was much more a landform building rather than a distinct building. The community groups were so upset by this. And Mayor Daley thought it was important to put there because, again, it would become a destination for children as well. And people were saying, no, this is free and clear always. And it failed. This was one that the community said no. But this is where right here was the Children's Museum. It just looks like another walkway. But they did not want it. They didn't want to bring any more crowds. And this was the idea, just walking by. So again, for the Phase 2 investment of that second piece of property, the private fund was $65 million, public funds $45 million. So now it's like a 60-40 split. And the public-private donated funds. At this point, there's just a park. It's going to be a beautifully landscaped park, but there's no building contained within that. And this is the motto that Chicago has always been known for, the Burnham. And I think that Millennium Park certainly has been that way, and it certainly didn't displace people at the time. But I think it's become so successful that now everyone's saying, okay, enough's enough. Let's now move on to another neighborhood.